The weather confirms this weird day. Feel that chill.
Max, there was no eclipse scheduled today. I would know. I would.
I believe you, Warren. I'll believe anything this week.
As you can see, hear, and feel, Life is Strange's biggest strength is its atmosphere. Every element of Life is Strange is designed carefully to make you feel nostalgic. The music and the visuals are obvious contributors to this, but there are more subtle cues, like the characters often using words like hella and bitchin'.
I hope you checked the perimeter, as my step-ass would say. Now, let's talk business.
I got nothing for you.
Wrong. You got hella cash.
Words that you probably haven't seriously heard in 10 to 20 years. The actual story and setting also lends itself to nostalgia, with the main character Max, an 18-year-old that has just begun attending school in Arcadia Bay, the town where she had spent most of her childhood. She hadn't been back to Arcadia Bay since she was about 12 to 13 years old, and she finds now that she's rekindling many of the relationships she had from before. It's clear that the game wants you to feel wistful, and it works really well. So the question I want to answer with this review: can an outstanding atmosphere save a game with a predictable, cliched story filled with side characters who follow pretty typical arcs? Life is Strange does a lot of things really well, and it does a lot of things terribly, so whether or not this game is one you'll enjoy is really going to depend on what you want from this game and ultimately what you expect going in. Life is Strange is a pseudo point-and-click adventure game that has one of those notices at the beginning of each episode to bash into your skull how much choices matter. Spoiler alert, choices mean next to nothing in this game. Go into it like you would a Telltale game, although hilariously Telltale is the other company that tells you choices matter at the beginning of their episodes, and try to see it as a slightly more interactive visual novel. That is pretty much how this game plays, though it has a couple of other mechanics that make the puzzle solving and decision making a little more interesting. It's developed by Dotnod and published by Square Enix, Dotnod being the company that developed Remember Me, which, if I remember correctly, had a pretty lukewarm reception. Square Enix obviously don't really need an introduction, though interesting tidbit, Square Enix was practically the only publisher who didn't want to change anything about the game. Apparently other publishers would only take it if Dotnod were willing to change the protagonist into a boy rather than a girl, which I thought was interesting. I think Square Enix does deserve some brownie points for being braver than the other publishers Dotnod approached, though we don't actually know who Dotnod approached other than Square, and this piece of information actually comes from the devs themselves and, to my knowledge, nowhere else. Maybe take it with a pinch of salt. While there are certainly some glaring issues in this department with aliasing and in particular the animation, I have to say I really like the clean, almost but not quite cel-shaded look of Life is Strange. I thought it really lends itself to the atmosphere, though a lot of that is not just the art style but the cinematography. I feel like these slow, out of focus shots would feel pretentious and annoying to me normally just from the sheer amount of them, but the game is pretty enough and, as I've said 1,000 times, atmospheric enough that it's okay. There's also the fact the main character is an amateur photographer, and the cinematography really captured how a student like her might film something, like it's trying too hard to be artistic. I speak as a student of media myself, and I can confirm that this is probably how I would make a film. It just seems like it's directed by someone still in or just out of film school, which may be intentional, but even if it isn't, It works well, so the intention is largely irrelevant. A lot of the time the animation is awkward. I don't think it's on the level of BioWare crappiness, because in the major moments of the game the animations are fine, but just every now and again I noticed it being pretty awkward, particularly when someone is talking to Max and they move their arms around. But where the animation is truly abhorrent is in the lips. The mouth movements and facial animations in general are so dead and lifeless, which is huge for a game that is trying to get you to love its characters. I found myself actively looking away from the characters' faces during tender moments, maybe read the subtitles or something, because my imagination was doing a far better job than the game was to make me feel something. There was one moment in the game where I was moved to tears and was a particular high point of the writing, but it could have been so much more if the facial animations were any good. The designs of the characters were pretty awesome too. This game, while cartoony, was trying to depict the real world more or less. It doesn't have the advantage that a game like Borderlands has, where the characters can be extremely zany. The artists had a lot of constraints on them in Life is Strange, where they had to design a ton of different characters, most of them being a similar age to one another, and tried to keep them distinct but still realistic. All of the characters look unique, the artists were clever with different face shapes and body types, and in particular hairstyles. There was a lot of variety there. I will say I did get confused between two characters at one point, Brooke and Stella. As you can see, they look almost nothing alike and are actually of two different ethnicities, so I'm going to place that blame on me rather than the game. I tend to have trouble with mixing up characters and storylines, so if you're like me, you might have a little issue with Brooke and Stella, but honestly, they're both minor characters anyway. The character design is varied and aesthetically pleasing to me, so that's all that really matters. The plot, unfortunately, I found was weak overall. There are one or two moments in the game that shocked me, and it went to interesting places for sure, but the story was mostly predictable. Probably the aspect that put me off the most, though, was the shoehorning of the mystery into the game. Suddenly, around episode 2, the characters begin saying there's something going on in Arcadia Bay and we need to find out what, when there really wasn't anything in particular happening. The weather was weird and someone got drugged at a party. That was about the extent of the quote-unquote mystery, and the characters suddenly felt the need to figure out what's going on as though they could possibly know there was some conspiracy happening. Whether there ended up being one or not is irrelevant, because I just felt so disconnected from the motivations of the characters. To be fair, there was a missing girl who had a connection to one of the main protagonists, and I could have easily gotten behind the motivation of let's find Rachel, which they did use sometimes, but whenever they brought up the idea that there was something bigger afoot, it just felt so forced and unnatural. I was genuinely interested in finding Rachel, but I couldn't care less about the rest of the mystery, though that didn't stop the game forcing it down my throat instead of sowing any real intriguing seeds near the beginning of the game. It's like the characters knew something I didn't, and that instantly makes me feel like an outsider to the plot, rather than as though I'm experiencing it along with the characters. Ultimately, there's a lot of plot holes and pointless meandering, so the actual story just feels poorly thought out. I said there are a lot of predictable moments, and there are, but in contrast, there are plot points that just seem to come out of left field, and not in the good way. They're over the top, which there's nothing wrong with necessarily, but it's the fact Life is Strange takes itself so seriously that it ends up being jarring. There was one twist that had me burst out laughing, but there was all this dramatic music and serious character dialogue that made me laugh even harder. This screams to me that the story is not self-aware at all, which might be a double bluff. Maybe that was what they were going for, so that they could make it feel like a true teen drama. That said, there were plot points that shocked me in the good way. Either way, I wasn't a fan of the way the plot played out overall, but I do know people who are really into teen dramas that take themselves too seriously. I mean, that's 90% of anime. I didn't like it very much, but if you're into that style, then, you know, don't let me tell you what to do.
scared shitless.
You need to get high. It's been a hella insane fucking day. What the hell is this?
Snowflakes?
It's like 80 degrees. How?
Climate change. Or a storm is coming.
Max, start from the beginning. Tell me everything.
I've harped on about the atmosphere being the real high point of the game already, so there isn't a whole lot for me to say that I haven't already said. There's so much here, intentional or not, that allows the atmosphere to be as haunting as it is. It's the cinematography, it's the dialogue, it's the setting, it's the characters. Not all of those elements of the game are very good on their own, particularly the characters and the dialogue, but when you consider them as a concept rather than the way they were executed, you begin to get a really strong sense of the atmosphere. And that tends to be the way people think of atmosphere. It's how the themes behind the game make you feel. It's more how you feel when you are not playing the game than when you are. When a game's atmosphere is truly incredible, you'll think about it when you're playing other games, and I did. I felt this unique pull to Life is Strange, which doesn't happen very often with me. If you play Life is Strange, you'll find that the nostalgic feeling sticks with you long after you've put the game down. Other than that, the actual setting is pretty nice. It's one of those Twin Peaks-like towns where everyone kind of knows each other, and in fact, the game can't seem to stop referencing itself to Twin Peaks.
Chloe, you're alive. Yes.
For me, Chloe, the blue-haired girl, is by far the best character. I think she's pretty well written, and aside from now and then, she tends to fit the otherwise bad dialogue of the game. I think it's mostly her voice actor, but even then her actual character just seems to fit the lines.
Speak of the devil.
Mom and Max, together again.
It feels like Dontnod wrote all of the characters to be based on Chloe, like they brainstormed what the typical teenager was, came up with Chloe, and then based all of the teenager dialogue on her. A lot of the things that the other characters say would sound great coming from Chloe, but make my face turn into a raisin when it comes from anyone else. I did really mean it when I said that the use of old words was cool and added to the atmosphere, but 90% of the time it comes across as adults who are pretending to be teenagers, like hip with the kids. It's really, really cringy, and I have to say, Max makes this even worse. That's a huge part of it. I feel like the main character, Max, is the worst of all of them. She suffers from Geralt syndrome, where a lot of the time she's just an emotionless zombie so that the player can imprint themselves on her. That's not my favorite kind of character, but I feel at worst, it's just boring. But then she goes off and delivers these lines.
Must protect my precious so Max never has to chase it down again.
That make me seize up. I mean, I think she's a realistic, awkward teenager for sure, but I don't enjoy being in her head. I think Chloe is relatively realistic feeling, but at the same time, I felt genuinely entertained by a lot of her lines. The writers didn't manage this with Max, and that was compounded by her, in my opinion, lackluster voice acting. I disliked everything about Max except for her taste in music and t-shirts. As for the rest of the characters, they follow pretty cliched arcs, and most of them weren't interesting in the first place. They all just had ridiculous cartoon personalities. Almost each and every character was taken straight from a high school drama, even the ones that were given depth and development either were extremely predictable, just didn't make sense, or ended up not going anywhere. I pretty much didn't care about any of the characters other than Chloe. Kate, in particular, felt shoehorned. She's going through some things during the story, and we're supposed to be really worried about her, but all of the conversations we had amounted to,
You look down. You okay?
I'm kind of over humanity today. Sorry to be a drama queen.
Is there anything...
Max, I'd like to be alone if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
I just didn't really care about her, past my most basic human feelings of emotion. The game didn't give me any reason to like her, but expected me to give a crap anyway. All I'll say is that it's a good thing I liked Chloe, because this game would have been a hard sell without her. I have been quite negative in this review, and I do stand by the points I've made, but you should know that for all its faults, I did like this game. The style of story has never really been done in games before, for one, so I found that interesting, but it was also the atmosphere, and as I've said before, I really did care about Chloe. There are moments when the writing is good, and as I've already admitted, I did cry once. If you can get over the fact that the actual plot of Life is Strange isn't going to be that great, then Chloe is really worth it. I didn't care about Max that much, but where the game really shines, aside from the atmosphere, is in the tender moments between Max and Chloe as ex-best friends. It's about watching them rebuild an old, broken relationship over the course of the story. There's also elements of the game that I have made the decision to omit from this review. Most people don't consider it a spoiler, but as someone who went in knowing nothing, I think I'd be souring your experience by including it. So I'd appreciate it if you try and avoid talking about this element of the game in the comments. So if you drugged me, tied me to a chair in a dark room, and forced me to make a decision on whether I recommend this game or not, I think I would recommend it. It always depends on the kind of gamer you are, obviously, but I think more people would like this game than dislike it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this review, please consider leaving a like, because that makes it easier for other people to find this video. If not, leave a dislike, guilt-free, but try and leave some feedback down in the comments for how I can improve for next time. See ya.